Something has been eating at me for weeks now, and I'm done sitting on it. I cover this league because I love it. The complexity of it, the brutal honesty of it, the way real football eventually cuts through every manufactured storyline and shows you exactly what is and what isn't. But right now, in Cleveland, Ohio, something deeply unfair is being constructed in plain sight. And the frustrating part isn't that people disagree with me. The frustrating part is that the story being sold to Browns fans doesn't match the reality on the ground, not even close. So let's actually look at this thing clearly. Without the agenda, without the predetermined landing spot, and without the financial talking points that keep getting dressed up as football analysis. Here's what actually happened. In April, the Cleveland Browns held a 3-day voluntary veteran minicamp. 3 days, voluntary, no pads, no incoming rookies, no live competitive pressure. This session exists in the NFL calendar for one specific reason. When a franchise hires a new head coach, the league grants a brief orientation window so coaching staffs can introduce concepts and begin building the vocabulary of a new system. That's its entire purpose. Todd Monken himself stood at a podium and told reporters that what they had conducted amounted to a 40,000-foot view. His words, his metaphor, not a verdict, not an organizational declaration. A first glance from altitude. And from that, from 3 days in shorts and helmets, the national sports media produced a narrative so certain of itself that you would genuinely believe they had spent the entire preseason embedded with the franchise. Deshaun Watson has the inside track. Watson looked commanding. Shedeur Sanders is falling behind and might not even hold the backup spot. That's what ran. That's what got amplified across the radio shows, the podcasts, the television segments, stacking on top of each other until the invented consensus started feeling like documented fact. And I keep coming back to the same question: how? From 3 days? From a session the head coach explicitly called a 40,000-foot view? Here's where the coverage doesn't just get the analysis wrong. It gets selectively dishonest, because Monken didn't just describe the session as preliminary. He addressed the rep distribution in a way that should have fundamentally altered every outlet's framing. He explained that the practice script gave Shedeur more overall reps in the original plan. The heavier run play emphasis of certain periods shifted the visual appearance of the session without reflecting any actual change in organizational intention. And here's the detail that absolutely should have led every report. Shedeur Sanders went first in 11-on-11 team drills. First, Monken said the rotation would change daily and that no conclusion should be drawn from the first day's distribution. None of this made it into the story that traveled. The image that spread was Watson reasserting veteran authority, while the rookie struggled to keep pace. That image is not supported by what the head coach said happened. It's supported by what certain voices had already decided happened before they listened to the press conference. And that gap between stated reality and constructed narrative is not a minor discrepancy. It is a pattern that has followed Shedeur Sanders everywhere since before he threw a single professional snap. Let me tell you about Miami, because this moment crystallizes something essential about who this young man actually is. Shedeur was in Florida training privately during the offseason, doing the unglamorous daily work that separates quarterbacks who develop from quarterbacks who stagnate. A content creator approached him, a streamer looking for footage, someone who wanted Shedeur to throw routes for social media. His response was immediate and clean. He communicated essentially that when you see a football in his hands, you need to understand what it represents right now. Minicamp is coming. Training camp is coming. He has a position to earn. He is not available for content. Sit with the full weight of that. He is a second-year quarterback competing against a veteran owed $46 million by the organization they both play for. The institutional pressure, the sunk cost psychology, the organizational desire to justify the most expensive commitment in franchise history, all of it is pushing in a specific direction before the first real snap is taken. He knows that, and his response to that tilted environment is to be in Miami before sunrise doing the work. His response is to turn down a streamer because football matters more. That is not content. That is character. And that kind of character, maintained under that specific kind of pressure, is exactly what you need from the person leading your offense when December comes and the game is on the line. Josh Cribbs entered this conversation and said things that deserve far more serious engagement than they received. Cribbs is not a fringe voice. He is one of the most beloved figures in the modern history of that franchise. A man who gave everything he had for that city and earned the credibility to say uncomfortable things when they need saying. What he said was not soft. He wants Shedeur to get a genuine shot. He wants to see what this quarterback can actually do with the full offseason, an invested coaching staff, and organizational clarity. Conditions his entire first season was never once given. His rookie year unfolded inside a franchise that was structurally chaotic, ownership in flux, offensive line unstable, the surrounding cast incomplete. And still, in 7 starts under those conditions, he competed well enough to make the Pro Bowl. But the observation that cuts deepest is when Cribbs invoked Baker Mayfield. He said that name with intention. Mayfield was discarded by Cleveland. The narrative turned against him, the support frayed, and then he went somewhere that actually believed in him, got the conditions that allowed him to operate with clarity, and won a Super Bowl. Cribbs is asking Cleveland a simple but devastating question. Are you about to do this again? Are you about to let the noise and the sunk cost push you away from something genuinely valuable before you ever gave it the environment to prove itself? That question will define what this franchise becomes over the next decade. The financial case for Watson gets made constantly, and I understand the internal logic. The $46 million is already gone regardless of what his name says on the depth chart. So the argument runs, if you're paying him anyway, why not let him compete fully? I get it. But here's what that argument refuses to account for. Every rep Watson takes is a rep Shedeur is not getting. Development doesn't accumulate in theory. It happens through specific repetitions under specific pressure with specific coaching attention. You cannot bank the reps Shedeur doesn't take in April and redeem them in September when it matters. The real cost of centering Watson in this competition is not in dollars. It's measured in the developmental timeline of the quarterback, who is supposed to represent the actual future of this franchise. That cost is real, whether or not it appears on any spreadsheet. There is something else that needs to be named because it reveals a great deal about how this story is being constructed. When Shedeur's brother Shiloh responded to a report suggesting Watson had gained a competitive edge, an unfiltered social media reaction from a sibling watching from outside, the response from certain Cleveland media personalities was revealing. One public voice advised Shedeur to tell his entire family to stay out of the quarterback battle. Another used the moment to cast doubt on Shedeur's own professionalism, as though his brother's tweet constitutes evidence of something wrong with the quarterback himself. The Browns fan base pushed back hard, and they were right to. Because what that reaction exposed is a pattern that has been operating since long before Shedeur arrived in Berea. He entered the draft and was disrespected in a manner that was documented and public. He arrived at a roster structurally unprepared to develop him. He competed under conditions that would have broken quarterbacks with far more institutional support, and still made the Pro Bowl. And yet, consistently, the coverage positions him as the problem, the one with the attitude, the one whose family complicates things. Meanwhile, the man owed $46 million who hasn't played meaningful football in nearly 2 years gets framed as the redemption story, the misunderstood veteran the right coaching staff might finally unlock. I'm not telling you what conclusion to draw from that contrast. I'm asking you to look directly at it and think carefully about whose interests that framing serves. Because framing doesn't just describe a competition. At sufficient volume, it participates in shaping one. The backup role speculation, the suggestion that Shedeur might not even hold the number 2 spot, is the most egregious projection in this entire coverage cycle. That conclusion rests almost entirely on the visual impression of 3 days of voluntary practice with no pads and no competitive pressure. Monken said it was a 40,000-foot view. The head coach of the Cleveland Browns said he has not named a starter and does not intend to draw conclusions from an April voluntary session. To project Shedeur as a potential third stringer from that evidence is not analysis. It is a conclusion formed before the evidence was gathered and then decorated with whatever fragments could be found to retroactively support it. Here's what actually contains real information. Prediction markets, environments where real money creates genuine incentive to be accurate rather than entertaining, have this competition considerably closer than the Cleveland media framing suggests. Watson leads, yes, but Shedeur holds a significant probability share in the projected outcome. When sophisticated observers with actual financial stakes in being right assign that much of the outcome probability to a 5th-round second-year quarterback in a competition that hasn't reached full OTAs, that is signal worth taking seriously. That's people who cannot afford to be wrong telling you this race is very much alive. And then there is the schematic question that I cannot understand why it isn't being engaged with more seriously. Monken built one of the most dynamic offenses in football in Baltimore around Lamar Jackson, a generational dual-threat talent whose legs are as dangerous as his arm, whose ability to threaten a defense across every dimension was the architectural foundation of everything Monken constructed there. Now consider, Shedeur Sanders is explicitly not that. He is a pocket processor, an accuracy-first quarterback who wins through timing, structural precision, and the ability to read coverage within a well-designed system. Watson, at his best in Houston, was also fundamentally a dual-threat player. His most dynamic football happened because his legs changed the defensive math on every snap. If Monken is now building an offense that centers pocket timing and decision efficiency as its primary operating principles, the honest question is whether Shedeur Sanders might actually be the better schematic fit for what this coaching staff is trying to construct. Not despite the Watson narrative, independent of it entirely. That is a genuine football question. It is not receiving genuine football treatment. Josh Cribbs said something else that went mostly under the radar, and I think it's the most important observation anyone has made about this situation. He talked about the new stadium, this genuine inflection point where, with the Watson contract finally moving toward the rearview mirror of franchise history, Cleveland has the extraordinary opportunity to step into a new era with a new identity and a new face who represents what is being built rather than what already failed. A new building needs a new story. A fan base that has absorbed more sustained pain than any city should reasonably be asked to carry deserves a quarterback they can genuinely grow with. Someone whose arc mirrors their own resilience, whose journey started in disrespect and fought toward the light. A quarterback who was disrespected at the draft, who arrived at a building structurally unprepared to develop him, who competed in genuinely brutal conditions and earned Pro Bowl recognition anyway, who spent his offseason in Miami doing unglamorous work and turning down content creators because he had more important things to do, who showed up to voluntary minicamp, went first in 11-on-11 drills, and then watched the national coverage declare that his competition had essentially already passed him. That is a story with real stakes and real resonance. That is the kind of relationship between a quarterback and a city that builds something durable. The kind that fills new stadiums with genuine belief rather than just bodies. But Cleveland only gets that story if they make decisions anchored in what the football evidence actually shows, not in what $46 million emotionally demands. The competition hasn't reached OTAs. Training camp hasn't started. No one has played under real pressure with real consequences attached. And as Cribbs put it, in the most honest framing I've heard from anyone covering this, the lights haven't come on yet. Everything that has been declared and projected and repeated into the shape of received wisdom is being projected from the dark. When the lights actually come on, when that huddle is real and the stakes mean something and everything else strips away, that is when this story gets written for real. Don't let 3 days of April practice in shorts tell you how it ends. The people who have already decided they know are going to have to sit with that certainty when the actual answer arrives. And my strong, considered, football-grounded feeling is that the answer is going to be considerably more interesting than the narrative they've been working so hard to sell.